Over to you.
Thank you very much, Oli, for this kind introduction. And good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this Meet the Expert talk. The idea for this talk came to mind when looking at the Wallace objects on display alongside the drawings on loan from the Disney studios that are currently in the exhibition Inspiring Walt Disney and the Animation of French Decorative Arts, open until the 16th of October. The exhibition is curated by Wolf Burkhardt from the Met and Helen Jacobsen from the Wallace side, and it focuses on how Disney artists drew inspiration from 18th century French objects and the common aim both at Disney and on 18th century decorative arts to bring life into inanimate objects. Visitors will immediately see that these earlier objects are full of references to nature, animals, plants, rocks, water features, which was a recurrent theme at the time. This talk is focused on a selection of decorative arts objects from the Wallace, so furniture, porcelain, and gilt bronze mostly, components that belong to the sphere or what we usually describe as interior decoration, and not so much on the so-called high art of painting, sculpture, and architecture. However, I will also draw your attention to the work of some key painters that worked during the first half of the 18th century and whose work were created in harmony and with the same spirit as the decorative arts that we will see. And they are principally Watteau, Oudry, and Boucher. But the lure of the natural world and the desire to harness and domesticate it is not new to the 18th century. From the Renaissance and during the 17th century, there was a growing interest amongst Europeans in studying the natural world from urban, courtly, and domestic settings. This practice, that was in parallel to the formation of cabinets of curiosities, which are collections of naturalia, and they included minerals, plants, and desiccated animals. We see in the image the famous example of Ole Worm's collection in Copenhagen. The cabinets of curiosities represented a vision of the cosmos or the known world, and although they were places of wonder, they were mostly intended as spaces for study. And I would like to compare this predominantly connoisseurial approach to nature with a more playful and decorative attitude that also makes its appearance in Renaissance Europe, and that through various reinterpretations would be fundamental for understanding the overwhelming presence of natural elements in the 18th century interior decoration. These are the grotesques. Grotesques became extremely popular in European decorative arts in the mid-16th century. The word grotesque derives from the Italian word for cave, a grotto, a reference to the excavated Roman palaces such as Nero's Golden House, rediscovered at the end of the 14th century. Grotesques are a combination of stylized branches, vines, and acanthus leaves with animals and fantastic figures derived from classical mythology, such as sphinxes and harpies, and they are all connected through thin architectural elements. This wine cooler shows some of these painted elements, and it shows how sometimes they were translated into three-dimensional renderings in the two winged monsters that support the bowl. Here we move forward, and grotesques of cut brass on tortoiseshell ground covered the back of this toilet mirror. They are based on a design by Jean Bérin, an influential ornaments designer who introduced light-hearted figures and naturalistic-looking animals to his compositions in the last decades of the 17th century. His designs and those of his fellow ornementistes were influential for the adaptation of these classical motifs, usually associated with palatial interiors, to intimate and domestic settings. The second half of the 17th century was an important moment for the promotion of decorative arts in France. Louis XIV, prompted by his finance minister Colbert, intended to establish France as the center for the production of luxury objects. In 1662, the Gobelin Royal Manufactory was established with the aim of supplying furnishes for the royal palaces, as well as creating luxury objects that could be sent as royal gifts. This protectionist measure was not at odds with the acceptance of foreign artists and craftsmen, initially mostly from the Netherlands and Italy. As we will see, artists bringing different creative ideas from other countries was a fruitful strategy. Towards the year 1700, there is a shift in the way building campaigns unfolded in Louis XIV palaces. The last project in the opulent and stately grand style associated with Louis XIV is the redecoration of the King's Bedroom, Versailles, completed in 1701. From then onwards, projects were less focused on building new palaces or entire new wings, and decorated with costly noble materials with heavy and imposing effects, and more interested in redecorating existing spaces using more affordable materials such as gilt wood and introducing a nuanced and delicate color palette. More relevant for our subject today is that decorative elements such as naturalistic flowers and the trellis work became popular in interiors, a fashion that was embraced by a younger generation of patrons that included the Grand Dauphin, Louis XIV's son, and the Duchesse de Bourgogne, the king's granddaughter-in-law. Louis XIV died in 1715, leaving his 5-year-old great-grandson and his heir, the future Louis XV. During his minority, the responsibility for leading the country fell on the boy's uncle, the Duc d'Orléans, who became regent. Philippe, Duc d'Orléans, decided to move the center of power from Versailles to Paris and established a court around his residence opposite the Louvre Palace, the Palais Royal. This resulted in the relaxation in court etiquette, allowing the until then closely served nobility at Versailles to return to the Parisian townhouses, where they could spend time and money redecorating them. This also coincided with a boom in financial speculation and the rise of a very wealthy and influential elite of financiers and tax farmers interested in cementing their newly acquired status through art patronage and architecture. This means a larger group of families investing in the decoration of their houses in Paris, most of them having gone out of fashion while they were largely required to stay in Versailles, and introducing or redesigning their private gardens, particularly achievable in the then outskirts areas of Paris that were being developed as real estate hotspots. This is mostly around the current Place Vendôme and in Saint-Germain, south of the river. The interest in seeking refuge in gardens and parkland, whether private or public, is central to the work of Antoine Watteau, an artist that captured the atmosphere of want of freedom and playfulness representative of the 1720s in Paris. During this period, known as the Régence, the Regency, the style in interior decoration echoed that playfulness and lightheartedness desired by Parisian society. Interiors let the outdoors in through a profusion of decorative motifs reminiscent of garden settings that included garlands of flowers and, above all, the trellis pattern. This motif was a direct reference to the wooden lattices that helped structure gardens, and they became especially popular in the sculptor decoration of wall paneling, as we see in the image, but we also see it in other objects such as this clock in the exhibition, and we see that repetition, this motif that is used in various places. A more traditional reference to nature was through hunting scenes, and hunting was a long-standing aristocratic activity, and synergetic scenes were expected in hunting lodges and country houses. But throughout the 18th century, these scenes also populated urban dining rooms and cabinets and salons. They allowed artists and designers to include a panoply of wild animals into their repertoire. This writing desk is attributed to Werner van Ryssenberg I, cabinet maker of Dutch origin that settled in Paris at the end of the 17th century and established a dynasty of cabinet makers. And we have just mentioned how important it was this influx of artists from other countries, such as the Netherlands and Italy. The desk is decorated with brass, turtle-shell, and mother-of-pearl marquetry known as bull marquetry, and is garnished with rich gilt bronze mounts, such as the solid metal stack legs that support it. The tabletop depicts the story of Diana, Roman goddess of the hunt, and Actaeon, a young nobleman that, while hunting, ventures into a thicker section of the forest where he spots the naked Diana taking a bath surrounded by her nymphs. Actaeon's audacity is punished with his transformation into a stag, and antlers sprout from his head, and we just see it here in the image, how those antlers are just coming out. The story is taken from Ovid's Metamorphoses, a recurrent source for European artists from the Renaissance until the 19th century. It ends with the gruesome dismembering of Actaeon by his own hounds, and thankfully the artist doesn't show that scene because it wouldn't have been palatable for a sophisticated client. What the artist relishes on is in depicting a number of side passages that are an opportunity to explore various hunting scenes in a woodland dotted with flying birds, leafy trees, grass, and even a monkey chasing a snail to the right of the image. And we'll get to the subject of monkeys later. One of the leading painters specialized in depictions of animals was Jean-Baptiste Oudry. Of the various scenes by him and his circle at the Wallace Collection, the Dead Roe and the Dead Wolf are the most spectacular. They show a halt on a hunting day. The setting is not the wild woodland depicted on Diana and Actaeon's desk, and here we are in a semi-domesticated setting with architectural elements reminiscent from gardens over which unkept surfaces, weeds and ivy grow wild. And clearly, nature creeps in before our eyes in these images. The 18th century saw fruitful crossovers of designs from paintings and sculpture to the applied arts. Tapestries, an essential element in the fashionable interior towards the middle of the century, is a good example of this transmission of designs. Oudry provided paintings as models for tapestries at the Beauvais factory from 1726, and he became director at Beauvais in 1734. He also worked for the Gobelin Royal Manufactory, supplying designs for Louis XV's Royal Hunt tapestries. And here to the left, we see a detail of a set of Beauvais tapestry covers for seat furniture woven circa 1755. The spaniel chasing a duck in the middle is similar to Oudry's painting on the right, although mirrored. The tapestries were then fitted into neoclassical chairs in the 19th century, hence the disparity between the Rococo compositions framing the hunting scene that we see here, with garlands of flowers, shells, and acanthus leaves, and the geometrical shapes of the gildwood armchair frame that we see here. Animals, especially exotic animals, made their appearance not just in paintings and decorations, but also as real-life specimens in private zoos or menageries. The tradition of collecting live animals from distant lands was seen as a symbol of the far-reaching power of the ruler, and it crossed continents and cultures can be traced back to antiquity. It is not surprising that one of the first projects carried out in the grounds of Versailles by a young Louis XIV in the 1660s was the creation of a menagerie. Although his initial aim was to impress the court and other dignitaries, an increasing interest in the study of natural sciences attracted scientists and artists to the menagerie. Oudry and the Flemish painter Peter Boyle repeatedly represented the king's animals, their sketches and canvases sometimes translated into prints for natural history publications. Boyle's depictions are particularly realistic, taken from direct observations of the live animals. They were destined to be included in a set of 12 tapestries with the months of the year and the royal residences. And we see here the example of a cassowary that is in the month of January. The menagerie at Versailles had a second life from 1697, when Louis XIV ordered its refurbishment in order to accommodate the 12-year-old Duchesse de Bourgogne, the wife of the king's eldest son. The king insisted that decoration should be youthful and playful, which included pastoral and garden scenes. For this miniature palace, André Charles Boulle should supply proportionately scaled-down furniture of playful outlines, decorated with turtleshell and brass marquetry or bull marquetry, and elaborate gilt bronze mounts. The console table that we see here is probably not one of the pieces supplied for the menagerie, but its shape and decoration is comparable to some of the pieces that were delivered. Whether it was destined for a zoo or not, the detailedly modeled lions' heads and paws are a vivid way to bring the animal kingdom indoors. Boulle planted the seed for a taste in elements of interior decoration that embraced the curves and free-flowing lines found in nature, a taste that bloomed between the 1730s and 1750s under the style known as the Rococo. Originally called le style rocaille, le style moderne, so the modern style, le goût nouveau, the new taste. The term Rococo was not commonly used until the 1830s, a century later, possibly intended as a slang to criticize the outmoded and frivolous art of the mid-18th century. Frivolous with inverted commas, of course. Although the etymology is uncertain, Rococo seems to refer to the rocaille or rockwork and coquillage or shells, elements used to decorate grottos and fountains, and that would become ubiquitous on furniture, bronzes, and porcelain over this period. Rocaille motifs were first introduced in the 1680s by designers like Pierre Lepôtre, and they were fully developed in the work of Juste Aurèle Meissonnier in the 1730s. In this engraving from the Met, also displayed in our exhibition, we see the sofa that Meissonnier designed for Count Bielensky as an integral element of a salon entirely covered with paneling in the most extravagant Rococo style. The rounded shapes of the sofa adapt to the human body, and the search for comfort, as it happened with the search for intimacy and playfulness, is also traceable to the first decades of the 18th century, while the intricate shell-like shapes of the sofa's frame adapt to the paneling behind. Meissonnier was born in the south of France, but he trained as a goldsmith in Turin, Italy, with his father. He is not the only goldsmith from Turin that succeeded in Paris as a designer in the Rococo style. Jean-Claude Chambellan Duplessis, who may have been a pupil of Meissonnier, was appointed bronze founder to Louis XV, for whom he supplied spectacular pieces. His take on the Rococo is less abstract than that of Meissonnier, with more literal references to nature, such as we see here the spaniel hunting a pheasant at the top of this clock. Duplessis' graceful, almost cute curvilinear shapes worked perfectly across media, what earned him the position of chief designer at the porcelain manufactory of Vincennes and then Sèvres, and we will see some of his work on porcelain in a little bit. Another bronze maker of Italian descent that made a successful career at the court of Louis XV was Jacques Caffieri, son of the Roman Philippe Caffieri, who had worked for Louis XIV and Cardinal Mazarin. In 1739, Jacques received the prestigious commission of supplying the gilt bronze mounts for the chest of drawers in Louis XV's new bedroom at Versailles. Again, this was an attempt to embrace a certain comfort and intimacy on the king's part, especially if we compare his new set of rooms with those of his great-grandfather at the center of the palace. Caffieri's bronzes are full of life. They expand vigorously through the veneer surfaces like branches, splashes of water, or flames. They include sprays of flowers, seed pods, leaves, bays, but also birds and bat wings. Oh, sorry. Let's go back. I was going to show you, we see the inclusion of bird wings, these bat wings appear. These motifs reminiscent of shells that broke up the cornice, and this one, in my view, is a nod to this garden or outdoors architecture. Meissonier, Duplessis, and Caffieri exploit the malleable qualities of metal to create pieces that seem to move before our eyes. It is not surprising that these artists pushed the boundaries of the Rococo style, for its intricate shapes could be translated into silver, gold, and bronze with accuracy. During the first decades of the reign of Louis XV, from the 1730s to the 1750s, France was one of the most powerful countries in Europe, reaching political stability and economic prosperity. This situation provided the ideal circumstances for a society interested in the promotion of art. Artistic industries were supported as part of a nation-state structure, as we will have seen with the Gobelins, and that this consolidated France's prestigious position in the world of luxury exports, a field that needed innovation, and this was achieved with the acceptance of foreign talents. The Rococo style that flourished at this time, intimate and light-hearted, suited the personality of Louis XV, who cultivated his private life more carefully than his predecessor. And his official mistress, Madame de Pompadour, found in delicate, surprising, and inventive Rococo artworks the perfect tool to keep the king excited and entertained. Thanks to her understanding of the king's personality and the power of art, she managed to secure an influential position at court, past that of the king's lover, and she became his friend and advisor. Madame de Pompadour patronized the painter François Boucher, who painted numerous portraits of her. Whether she appears in her boudoir reading a book or in a garden with her favorite dog, as we see here, references to the garden, predominantly flowers, that appear on her dress and her hair are abundant. But it is Boucher's mythological paintings, where occasionally an idealized portrait of the Marquise appears as a nymph, such as here in The Setting of the Sun, that the artist fully embraces the creative possibilities that the Rococo has to offer. It has been noted by Melissa Leahyde that here the boundaries between painting and decorative art is porous. In the spirit of Meissonier's designs, the composition does not follow a rectilinear pattern, resulting in a seemingly haphazard organization of the various elements before us, comparable to the organic arrangement of Caffieri's gilt bronze mounts on Louis XV's commode. If there is an industry in which the involvement of Madame de Pompadour was fundamental for its success, that is porcelain. She is credited with sparking the king's interest in investing on the Vincennes porcelain manufactory in 1753, and which from 1759, after its relocation in Sèvres, became a royal enterprise. Porcelain is also the perfect medium for the introduction of the organic shapes characteristic of Rococo design. It can be modeled, molded, and trimmed with precision. It can be decorated with colorful painted scenes, such as landscapes, animals, and flowers. It can take intricate gilding patterns that at Vincennes at Sèvres often nod to the world of gardens and nature, as we see in this example. In the image to the left, an object produced at Vincennes when production started to pick up after the king's first investment is when Duplessis was the manufacturer's artistic director. We see this teapot decorated with an underglaze lapis blue ground color, the first ground color introduced at Vincennes. Its uneven edges are masked with a profusion of gilding that include a Rococo trellis, branches, flowers, and a bird spanning its wings. And you see how this frames very nicely the scene of the bird in this landscape. To the right, we see a vase in the Greek taste of the 1760s, the earliest version of Neoclassicism, in the shape of a classical column. The shape is attributed to Duplessis, who, despite adapting to the new antique-inspired fashion, so here we are in the 1760s, includes a powerful reference to nature in the form of a fountain jet lid from which water cascades down the column, with spiraling dolphins as handles either side. And you see, this is the lid, and it represents a fountain. One of the great successes of the Vincennes-Sèvres manufactory is the production of delicate and naturalistic porcelain flowers. As we have already mentioned, the inclusion of flowers across different media is the trademark of the 18th century decoration. Bouquets of real flowers were displayed in every room of the house, arranged in vases that range from simple glass vessels, faience or earthenware pots imitating garden pots, to expensive porcelain vases and jardinières, large pieces of furniture in their own right. On the other hand, artificial flowers were made of silk, tulle, paper, or porcelain, and could be arranged in bouquets that would last all year round, and they were used to adorn other objects. Also dresses, hairdos. They would hang as garlands on walls of bedrooms and boudoirs. Sometimes flowers modeled in rice and almond paste or in sugar paste would cover the dining table. So flowers were used absolutely everywhere within the house in the 18th century. As Tamara Préau has argued, the tradition of producing model porcelain flowers can be traced back to Ming Dynasty China. So we are between the 14th and the 17th century. They were first used to decorate porcelain vases, and from the early 18th century, they were produced on their own, attached to wire stems wrapped in tissue. In France, Saint-Cloud and Chantilly took the lead in the first decades of the 18th century, producing modeled flowers that were applied to larger objects, such as potpourri, signaling the function of these objects, and also to clocks, for instance. However, these were not entirely naturalistic flowers. As the century advanced, interest in producing naturalistic flowers that could trick the eye increased. This trend coincided with the development of botanical studies, such as those of Carl Linnaeus, and with the publication of illustrated volumes that served as inspiration to designers and artists. In this field, Vincennes took the lead. Initially, around 1745, standalone flowers were produced, either left in white or partly colored with a restricted palette. But from the late 1740s, Vincennes produced a botanically accurate porcelain flowers decorated in naturalistic colors. By now, we should mention that this was technically possible thanks to the development at Vincennes of a porcelain paste known as soft paste that, unlike the real hard paste porcelain imported from China and produced at Meissen from around 1710, allowed craftsmen and craftswomen to model delicate, supple-looking petals. In addition, the enamel colors developed specifically for this soft paste fused with the glaze when fired in the kiln, enabling a nuanced palette with a painterly effect not achieved in hard paste porcelain. To the left of the image, we see the most celebrated object decorated with porcelain flowers that has survived to this day, the Bouquet de la Dauphine, sent by Marie-Joseph de Saxe, Dauphin of France, to her father Augustus III of Saxony in 1749. Maureen Cassidy-Geiger has studied the commission in detail, describing the species reproduced and suggesting their possible symbolic meaning. Vincennes and Sèvres porcelain flowers attached to metal stems covered in fabric and painted in naturalistic effect, appeared on clocks, inkstands, wall lights, chandeliers, as well as on similar decorative compositions supported by Rococo gilt bronze mounts. These confections, as they were sometimes referred to, could be acquired through luxury goods dealers, the marchands merciers. Their network of wealthy clients, skilled providers, and fashionable designers gave them advantage when it came to assembling these fanciful creations. The Wallace Collection doesn't have any of these objects, unfortunately, and we need to look at some of our vases and teawares to find these exquisite porcelain flowers. The example on the right is the lid of a potpourri vase. It combines low-relief enamel flowers on the bulbous body of the lid, creating a lace-like mesh through which the scent would have escaped, with a top finial of fully modeled flowers, each individually painted with accuracy. The meticulous job of producing these flowers was confided to a team of female workers under the direction of Madame Clara, who in 1749 became the director of the flowers workshop. Potpourri vases were an essential addition to 18th century homes. They brought in the scents of flowers even when they were out of season. The potpourri may seem a simple concept, just some dry flowers added to the vase or a bowl, but in truth, it required know-how and attention to detail in the preparation of a successful recipe. As it is indicated by its name, potpourri, or rotten pot, is a mixture of elements in the composition to which liquid, often rose or orange water, is added. Elegant women would have created their own, or they could have purchased their potpourri mixtures from perfumers in Paris and Grasse, and they appear in numerous quantities in inventories. At Vincennes, they were produced from the early 1750s, although examples in faience, Chinese and Meissen porcelain, also in silver and lacquer were already available. The potpourri in the image is the centerpiece of an extraordinary garniture. Its production is the combination of Sèvres' artisans' technical prowess and Duplessis' whimsical Rococo designs. In addition to potpourri vases and decorative vases per se, Vincennes Sèvres created an enticing selection of vases destined to hold either cut or porcelain flowers, and also vases to grow flowers and bulbs in them. The cuvette in the image correspond to the first category. Flowers were probably assembled in metal linings, such as the copper lining that the luxury goods dealer Lazare Duvaux sold in 1754 to Madame Courteil. She was the wife of Louis XV's finances man at Vincennes, after which the object on the right of the image was named. It is decorated with naturalistic bouquets of flowers that seem to project forward over this blue ground. The cuvette Verdun to the left is decorated in the central reserve with a rustic scene after the 17th century Dutch painter David Teniers the Younger. We may be surprised to find such scenes of rural life in highly sophisticated Sèvres porcelain, but they were hugely popular. They reflected the kind of paintings that were highly appreciated by French 18th century collectors, and the subjects are actually, in a way, connected to the more polished pastorals that we associate with this period. The second category, that of vases for growing plants and bulbs, is illustrated by by the side components of this 5-piece garniture in our collection, fittingly decorated with flowers on a white background. While the cuvette at the center was another example of the vase designed to hold either cut of porcelain flowers, the vase Hollandois Nouveau to the left, a smaller curved version of the initial design, was conceived to grow plants. The central fan-shaped section could be filled with soil where the flowers were planted. Water could be added when necessary through the pierced section on the detachable base. So this is the top, it detaches from the base, and inside this base you can fill it with water to water your plant. And the plant would have absorbed that water through tiny holes pierced on the inner vase. So this this vase continues inside, and it has two tiny holes inside that we don't see that would have helped the plant to fed. And to the right, we see the pedestal-shaped pot that could be used for growing bulbs in the spring and summer, or also for displaying small porcelain busts or bouquets of porcelain flowers in winter. The tradition of growing bulbs in ceramic pots was popular from the 17th century, when specific pots for growing bulbs, such as the famous tiered pyramid produced in Delft, could be found in collections in France and England. Sèvres' entrepreneurial aim to cover all aspects of this market even took them to produce porcelain watering cans, such as this one in the image. A very sophisticated vase for growing plants is the dolphin vase to the left, the vase à dauphin. The pierced netting on the base, through which water could be added, is reminiscent perhaps of an interpretation of the garden trellis, or maybe is a fishing net, which could have been very appropriate for these two dolphins. The vase is decorated with birds on a landscape, so furthering the theme of nature. The aquatic theme, so central to the Rococo vocabulary with its shells and fountains, also makes a veiled appearance in the splash-shaped mouth of the ear vase to the right. And you see this is almost like a fountain of water splashing through this top. And we see the ear vase here in full. People in the 18th century were aware of the earthly nature of ceramics and how the traditional four elements were involved in its manufacture. The earth and water that create the clay, and the fire and air that transform it in the kiln. The representation of these four elements, along with the four continents and the four seasons, were a common thread in European decorative arts from the Renaissance, including, of course, Sèvres porcelain, and we have this lovely example here. This traditional way of understanding and explaining the variety in nature was gradually superseded throughout the 18th century as scientific studies were published. Such new awareness of the riches of the earth, as Juliet Caris argued, spurred the creation of new decorative patterns derived from the observation of mineralogical specimens. At Sèvres, the pebble-like cailloute and warm tunnel vermiculaire gilded decoration that appeared in the late 1750s remind us of the magnified visions of mineral surfaces that microscopes could have provided. And microscopes were fashionable instruments that appear, among others, in the collections of Louis XV and Madame de Pompadour. Language that refers to the natural world also described other gilded decoration at Sèvres, such as œil de perdrix, partridge's eye, or sable, sand-like. And we see four wonderful examples here of the pebble-like cailloute, warm tunnel-like vermiculaire, this sand, glistening sand sable, and the partridge's eye, œil de perdrix. I would like to end this talk with a brief look to the importance of depicting animals in French 18th century interiors, focusing on three widespread examples: monkeys, elephants, and rhinoceros. In the 17th century and the 18th century, people were fascinated by monkeys. They were seen as ambivalent animals with positive connotations such as wisdom and negative, such as cunning and heresy. Artists enjoyed representing their ability to imitate human behavior as part of an artistic current known as the singerie. So singe is monkey in French. Entire rooms were decorated with these motifs, and some important examples have survived, two of them at Chantilly, as we see here in the image. They were painted by Christophe Huet for the Prince de Condé. Singerie were particularly linked to the taste for the exotic, and decorations inspired in East Asia known as chinoiserie. Bull had already used a motif of tightrope walking monkeys in the console table that we saw earlier, and which I show you here from the top. This could derive from 17th century Flemish print sources, but designers such as Jean Bérin also introduced monkeys playing humans in their designs for decorative art objects. In addition to realistic monkeys in porcelain, Meissen introduced in the 1750s sets of figures of monkeys in 18th century costume, adopting the roles of members of an orchestra and integrated into complex objects with gilt bronze mounts. And we see a wonderful example here. We mentioned earlier Louis XIV's menagerie at Versailles, which was not an exception by any means, since collecting exotic animals was a well-established aristocratic pursuit. More exceptional was the creation of a porcelain menagerie, such as that created by Augustus the Strong at his Japanese palace in Dresden. Commissioned in 1733, Meissen sculptors Gottlieb Kirchner and Joachim Kandler modeled a staggering 650 large-scale animals. Meissen also produced small-scale porcelain animals, including elephants. They were considered a symbol of power and wisdom and appeared in Chinese and Japanese examples. Porcelain elephants were also produced at Chantilly between 1730 and 35, where artists could have been inspired by prints and also the descriptions of an African elephant given by Pedro II of Portugal to Louis XIV. This elephant was famous. It was described as having a gentle disposition, and it survived 13 years. And when it died in 1681, its dissection was a major scientific event. A study after its autopsy was published in 1733-34, and its skeleton is kept in the Natural History Museum in Paris. The elephant vases produced at Sèvres between 1756 and the early 1760s, of which I am showing you here one of a pair from a different pair that I showed you earlier, flanking the potpourri vase, are Duplessis' imaginative response to celebrate the status of this animal. Elephants were often compared and measured with rhinoceros, possibly fueled by the unfounded tradition that they were natural enemies. These large African mammals were highly coveted by European rulers, and famous examples were recorded in the 16th and 17th centuries, such as that in the possession of the King Manuel I of Portugal, who sent it to Pope Leo X, and that was famously immortalized by Albert Dürer. The anatomical incorrection of the rhinoceros armor-like hide in Dürer's print is probably due to the fact that the artist never saw the animal in real life and worked from descriptions. There was probably no other individual animal in the 18th century that achieved more attention than Miss Clara, the rhinoceros. Miss Clara was born in captivity in 1738, what gave her a tame character, and she was brought to Holland in July 1741 by an East India Company merchant who intended to make some business touring her around Europe. Between 1741 and her death in London in 1758, Miss Clara visited at least 60 cities in Europe. She was painted by Pietro Longhi in Venice and by Udry in Paris when she visited the French capital in 1749, and she was exhibited at the fair at Saint-Germain. Her popularity influenced Parisian fashion, with women sporting ribbons and hairdos à la Rhinoceros, so rhinoceros-like. Numerous sculptures in bronze and porcelain were made of Miss Clara, and some of them integrated into decorative art objects, as we see in the clock here from the Fitzwilliam. I hope that I have convinced you about the key role of elements taken from nature in French decorative arts of the first half of the 18th century, and also that I have persuaded you to visit our inspiring Walt Disney exhibition. Thank you.